All right, everybody, welcome to Project Herpetoculture Podcast, episode 10. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined by Philip Leitz, as always. And I want to take a quick moment to acknowledge our host network, Animals at Home, with Dylan Perrin, the GOAT, as Phil would say.
He is the GOAT.
There's no doubt. And and also our sponsor, Custom Reptile Habitats. If you look in the show notes of our episodes, you will find an affiliate link. And if you make a purchase at Custom Reptile Habitats through that link, we will receive a little kickback. Helps us keep the lights on over here. And also, by the time this episode airs, we will have launched our Patreon. So you can check that out as well. If you're interested in supporting the show, we'll have a link in our Instagram bio and show notes and all of that stuff to make it easy to find. We really appreciate all of the support and encouragement that we've received already on the show. It feels like, only 10 episodes deep. It already feels like it's just like really gathering a lot of steam and momentum, and we're both super grateful for that.
Couldn't agree more.
And super excited about where this is going. So with that being said, I would love to introduce our guest for today, and that is my dear friend Max.
Hey, what's up?
And so Max and I have been acquainted for a few years now, and have had lots of kind of ongoing fun conversations about herpetoculture and its value in the world and its value to ourselves. And as soon as we started this podcast, Max was one of the first people that came to mind for me of like someone I wanted to bring on the show, someone who I think has valuable insights and perspectives. And that being said, I'd love to hear from Max. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got started in herpetoculture, and then kind of what species you're working with and focusing on right now.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in like Eastern Colorado. So I had and I was a huge like dino kid. My dad's like a paleo artist, so he like sculpts dinosaurs, all that kind of stuff. So he always encouraged that for me. Like we were always out walking around, and we lived in a pretty rural area. So we'd see all sorts of stuff, but I think I'd see like garter snakes, I'd start lots of garters. I think my first like kind of captive experience was just a tiger salamander that we just like found outside that I kind of kidnapped. But we had that thing forever, and it was just amazing. But I had a lot of like crayfish. Where I live right now, that'd be a crawdad, but out there it's a crayfish. And then you got I had like bluegill that I also would catch from the lake and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of aquariums more before I had like reptiles and all that. But my dad also had he kept like berms and like monitors and stuff before I was born, and we always had like a couple herps around. So it was really cool growing up surrounded by that. He really encouraged us like going out and like herping, but also just like kind of, I guess like he was very much like a naturalist, so that really kind of shaped how I grew up. And then as far as what I'm currently keeping, so I have kind of my biggest thing is Thrasops jacksoni, so Jackson's tree snakes. So I have a 1-1 pair, and I just hatched my first clutch from those this past year. So I have 4 juvies at this point. And I'm expecting, knock on wood, another clutch relatively soon. And then I have a pair of Langaha madagascariensis. So that's the Malagasy leaf nose snakes. They're really nice. They're really cool. Then there's, I think there's a pair of, I don't unsexed pair of Mimophis muffalensis, the Mahafali big-eyed snakes, also from Madagascar. I have just some kind of odd, like I have a huge like morning gecko colony that just like is always expanding. I have the like crested gecko that I've had for absolutely forever. Then I have one just like Gonyosoma oxycephalum, the red tail green rats. Just one of those. And then I have one Philothamnus irregularis, which is the bush snake from West Africa.
Yeah. Very nice.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, no. So I was just gonna say, it's actually kind of interesting that you said you were doing like aquarium stuff a little bit, kind of where you did herps. That's pretty intriguing because I feel like that's a through line there with you, and then Connor mentioned this thing, and then I want to say there was at least one other person we spoke with who mentioned messing with aquariums early on before they did reptiles, and that's a pretty intriguing similarity, because especially between yourself and because all three of or at least all two or three of the people I'm thinking of are keeping it a pretty elevated level of sort of enclosure construction and dynamics, and like really thinking about many moving parts, which do you feel like that kind of comes from some of that aquaculture stuff, or do you think that would happen?
I don't know. I think I kind of just like, I don't know, kind of half-assed the aquarium stuff. Like I was like very much like a child when I was doing the aquarium stuff. I had like a brackish tank, but I'm sure I was like over salting the fish. I was just like salting them. Like I'm not sure. I didn't really know what I was doing at that point. Yeah, I kind of got into it. I think I mostly was doing the fish stuff because it was like more accessible to me at the time.
Right.
Because like I was doing the like wild caught fish and stuff, and I had I mean, like if you went to like Petco or PetSmart or whatever, you get like, I don't know, like $3-4 fish, and that was a lot more accessible to me.
Yeah.
And then I eventually got a bearded dragon from the Scales and Tails.
Yeah.
I think it's the one in Lakeland.
Yes.
But yeah, so that was it's got the big old milk snake on the front.
Yeah. There's a few of them here now. I think there's
oh
one,
wow.
Yeah, there's one like up in North Glen, there's one in Lakewood, there's one in Denver. At least I think so. They've kind of turned into there's quite a few.
Oh wow.
Yeah, oddly.
Yeah, it's been a minute since I've been to Denver, but
yeah.
But I ended up getting a bearded dragon that I raised up, and then I like bred those for a little bit after I moved to Missouri. I had a couple of clutches, but again, like I still like didn't really know what I was doing. Like by that point, I was, I like read. I mean, I was always doing like Steve Irwin, all that kind of stuff. But I'd like been to a reptile expo or two. I had watched like the Dave Kaufman like Herpers documentaries and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like bearded dragons were kind of like my real thing that I got into, and I think like that kind of shaped how I view the different like systems that I work within now, as opposed to like fish keeping, because honestly, like I could not tell you that much about fish. I was very much like a child. Yeah.
Okay, so I overblew that a little bit.
A little bit. That's all right though.
I too that was sort of how I got my start as well. Was with I was keeping stuff as a little kid, but the first stuff I ever kept in a committed way were bearded dragons. Yeah.
Yeah. No, great pet reptile for sure.
Yeah, they're super cool.
That was the first species I ever bred as well.
What?
Whoa.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked about that on the podcast, but yeah, I hatched hundreds of beardies as a teenager.
Yeah, dude.
And
nice.
I have this big alligator skull.
Yeah.
That I've had since I was 12 or 13, and I bought it with the first $100 that I ever earned, and I earned it from breeding beardies and selling them to my local pet store.
That is so.
And I still have it, and it's just like the ultimate nerd trophy. Like I sold some baby lizards to buy a larger lizard skull.
That's pretty.
Yes, I know that crocodilians are not lizards, people.
We get hate mail.
How dare you, dude? How dare you? That's awesome. Yeah, I had the first I was living at my dad's house when I was young, and when I was started breeding bearded dragons, and I had my bedroom, and the whole agreement was at a certain point, because I just wanted more, and I was so obsessed with dragons. I was like, it was all I wanted. And my dad was like, look, you can do what you want, but you got to keep it. It's got to be in your room. You can't have it outside your room. So I had,
Oh no.
like, I had my bed and I shoved it up against my closet. And then, so on one side of the bed, I had like 5 stacked cages, which had the adults that I had. And then in front of the bed, sort of at the edge of the bed, I built a rack where on the like a big, or not a rack, but it was like a wooden shelf. So it had 2 rows. So I had 2 rows of baby cages. And then on the bottom shelf, I put 3 incubators because I was really cranking them out for a little while. I was really just like doing that pretty relentlessly. Yeah, it was cool, man. It was fun to do. My dad was pretty shocked that I managed to fit that many birds into the bedroom. Which was intriguing, and it didn't smell very good in there, but you know, that was just sort of how it went.
This actually reminded me, this is like a fun little bit of like herp lore that I had kind of forgotten about until just now. But
Yeah.
When I was doing the same thing with the beardies, selling them actually to somebody named Christopher Bobel. Do you know who that is? Chris Bobel. So he's kind of famous in the mountain king snake world for like Lampropeltis pyromelana, the Arizona mountain king snakes. And there's like you'll still see today like Bobel line pyros and stuff like that. And I don't actually know how I became acquainted with him, but like basically like I would hatch a bunch of beardies and then I would call Chris Bobel and be like, I've got another clutch of beardies, and he'd come over to my mom's trailer where I was living and collect them, and then he would take them and distribute them with all the pet stores, you know. And but we had like a little thing going, and now like in hindsight, I'm like, oh man, I wonder if he's still around, like what he's doing, because he was like one of the early like super serious colubrid guys, you know.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Probably still doing it.
Hopefully, yeah. We're gonna have to eventually. There's so many rad colubrids out, just North American colubrids. We're gonna have to talk with at least a couple of some of those breeders, folks, kind of at the cutting edge.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Anyhow, sorry. Let's go ahead.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, you kind of very briefly mentioned the success that you've had breeding Thrasops jacksoni, and that's a species that up to this point, you know, has not been bred with any regularity in the US, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, actually, so, and this is like just my limited knowledge. So there was someone named Skip Loader who was breeding jacksoni pretty regularly in the early 2000s, and a lot of the information, like the kind of husbandry information that I found online that isn't just like direct source information, you know, like rain, weather stuff, like it is from Skip Loader's blog. And I've tried to contact him because I've like found his Facebook profile, and I think a couple other Drosshouse keepers have, and no one's been able to. But he was bred them a couple times in the early 2000s, and from what he wrote, it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of interest in them, so he kind of stopped. Which is unfortunate. And I would have, you know, loved to, if he's listening to this, which I kind of doubt, but
never know.
But you know, if he is, I'd love to talk to him. But yeah, that's the only individual I'm aware of in the US who's bred them regularly. There's Brittany Williams with Ivory Exotics just had a clutch that I think is now just incubating. So that's really nice too. But
so what was that experience like? Oh, go ahead, Phil. Did you
go. That your question was better.
It was pretty like painless as for me. I think it was just like pretty nerve-wracking, since this was my first snakes that I've hatched. Like I've hatched like just like rat snakes that we like found in a mulch pile that we disturbed, you know, like as a kid, but like this is the first like actual captive breeding I've ever done with snakes.
Nice.
So I was like, the entire process, I was super anxious about like, oh, like, and I was most worried, about egg binding because that's been an issue with other keepers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was relatively painless. I just did some, temp humidity cycling, some light cycling, introduced them, and when cohabbing hasn't ever gone particularly well for me. But then they ended up breeding successfully, and then I ended up with eggs, and I had the clutch was 5 originally, and then one stopped developing a couple weeks prior to the others hatching, but all other 4 are doing really well.
That's awesome. What is it about? Tell me a little bit about what compels you about those snakes.
Yeah, so I think it's just like how like reactive they are. Like they are related to boom slaying, so they're like in the taxonomic tribe Sphaladini. So it's like like twig snakes, Dysphalutis, like boom slaying. And then there's some like the dagger tooth snakes, which I believe is like Ramphiophis. Some really cool snakes in that tribe, but they're super reactive. Like I don't know if you've ever seen like footage of one like moving its head, but it's almost bird like, like it's incredibly reactive, like kind of like coach whips.
Yeah, I've seen
but they're just like on you. Like I think they're both watching me right now. Both the adults are watching me. I'm sure the babies are too. But they just are watching your every move. They're like incredibly reactive. They have cool like bluff. They do like bluff strikes, and they have this like throat swelling, and I think is really cool.
Yeah.
I love I think Brittany described it as like an oil slick color. It's kind of hard to capture. I'm not like a great photographer either, but just like the depth of that color, they have that kind of brownish greenish hue to the head, and then it's just like oil slick black. It's really really gorgeous.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Are they regular? You got to bear with me on some of this stuff. For me personally, snakes are I love all reptiles. I truly do, but I still have a lot of learning and growing to do with understanding most snakes and crocodilians and amphibians. I mean, those are all so far out my wheelhouse personally. So are they fairly commonly imported, or is it small numbers? How does that?
Yeah, so what's more commonly imported is Thrasops occidentalis, which are the western tree snakes. So you see a lot of those come in. They tend to come in. I'm not like an importer or anything. This is just like my experience, and there's other people who know a lot more about this than me.
Sure.
But from what I've seen, they tend to come in pretty heavily parasitized, and they have a stronger preference for lizard and amphibian prey, which I think can cause issues with importers acclimating.
Right.
Jackson and I come in every once in a while, but I think I'd say like I see them kind of pop up a couple times a year, so not all the time. But occidentalis pop up a lot more often, and then like flavicularis, which is the yellow-throated tree snake, pops up less often than that. And then there's I believe it's an endangered species called Thrasops schmidti, which is never imported, obviously. Well, maybe someone in Germany has it. I don't know, but
somebody's got one.
You can probably count on that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, they're super cool snakes.
You've described to me this like behavior that they'll do of kind of like this like chewing. Can you describe that a little bit for the listeners? Because I feel like it's just like so ominous and interesting.
Yeah, so like whenever they're getting ready to strike, and they're aglyphous snakes, but they have like a medically significant bite, which is a whole nother thing. But yeah, they'll start like kind of chewing a little bit, like before they even strike. Like once they've smelled food, or even if I'm, like invading their personal space in any way, like if I'm going in there with my gloves, like messing around, they'll like start chewing. They'll puff up, and they'll kind of curl back into like a strike pose, and it's really cool to see. But definitely kind of keeps you on your toes, and they're so fast
a little
too.
unnerving.
Yeah,
That's scary.
for sure.
Yeah. Have you been tagged by one of them yet?
No, not yet. Knock on wood. Yeah, I've been pretty careful. I usually will wear. I have like a whole list of kind of protocol I go through, and I have like a bite protocol sheet and all that kind of stuff. And then I'll wear like a jacket and then like thick gloves.
Yeah.
I'll do like thinner gloves for the juvies too.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I'll do hooks whenever I can. I don't want to. I usually like do not handle them unless I like need to move them.
Sure. Wow.
It's reasonable for such a potent species. It's no joke to get bitten by one, it seems like, potentially at least.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarity between boom slang and Thrasops venom. It's just that their like delivery system is so poor. So that's kind of it's kind of the reason that I feel even comfortable keeping them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, totally.
We're not allowed in Colorado to have rear fang anything. Even I know anything, no rear fang, so I can't have hogs of any.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I can't have hog nose.
Spilotes are out.
Yep. And there was something, I don't know the exact details, but it had something to do with I think venomous snakes specifically have been not allowed here for a long time. I worked at a reptile store here called Reptilian Haven, which was the reptile shop in the state, and they had the owner owned a venomoid albino western diamondback for a little while, and so he kind of had he had it before the regulations put in place, so he was able to kind of get grandfathered in. But it was a real bummer. It was something to do with, there was some big hubbub around a shipment of boiga that ended up here. And,
I bet.
So and it was a drag because I had just bought some tricolor hogs that I had, and I got inspected, and they were like, "Hey, you can't have those." And I was like, "You got to be fucking kidding me! It's a tricolor hognose snake. What's it gonna do to me, bro? What do you?" It was a real bummer.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I had not realized that about Colorado. And I mean, I always think of like Steve Mackesy, who does all this awesome research on particularly epistiglyphic species is Colorado. So it's like kind of funny to me that that's the case, but obviously things are different for researchers and institutions.
Yeah. And there's there's probably some loopholes in there. Like there's some talk that having, say, heloderma, so helas and beetles, it might be okay because they're venomous lizards, not snakes. There's I think there's a super well-known Gila breeder who lives down in
I was gonna say it's like Doc Stewart's out in Colorado, right?
Yeah, that's him. Yeah. And I'm not familiar with him. We're not friends. I know of him.
Yeah,
but I don't speak with the guy, so I don't know. It's totally outside my understanding, but it's one of those things. And of course, I've got plenty of friends who I know who keep stuff they're not supposed to have, which is like, all right, fine. I mean, you do you, man, but dudes keeping sidewinders in their closets,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They're cute. It's tempting,
It's extremely tempting.
Sure.
I can't. Man, I've been bit by my Egyptian Uromastyx. I'm not gonna fuck with a venomous snake.
I wouldn't want to.
I've had a few of our local Crotalus oregonus, the northern Pacific rattlesnakes, just because I am dealing with them so regularly, and occasionally I'll take one home if it's looking skinny or having a rough time, and give it a few meals and put it back out. But it's definitely one of those things where it's like, I question it, I'm like, okay, I don't want to get complacent at all with this, because it's just not, I know I'm not going to like die from a bite, or anything like that. I know, but it's just, honestly, the scariest part about it for me is the hospital bill.
Yeah.
For real, yeah.
Otherwise, I'm actually like pretty curious, honestly, about what it would be like to be bitten. Just because it's such a, I'm sure it would be such an intense experience. I'm not saying that just to clear, I'm not seeking that in any way. I'm
Thrill
very
seeker,
cautious and
Roy.
like,
Perhaps,
and
maybe for you, this is your journey, man. This is going to be your big revelatory experience. You're going to disappear into the desert for 3 days, get bit by some venomous snake, and just wait and see what happens. Just walk
I
around.
mean, it would be a story to tell, it'd be
Yeah.
worth telling on the podcast for sure if it happened.
I don't have to do it now.
Gotta do it for the podcast.
Maybe when we hit 100 episodes, if we get there, then I'll consider
There you
it.
go. Yeah. Or maybe when we get 100 listeners.
Oh yeah, there we go. Let's have more attainable goals here.
Yeah, sure. So Max, I'm sure some of this is going to overlap with some of what Roy wanted to ask, but
Yeah.
I'm curious what some of your goals are with herpetoculture through your practice, and if, I mean, maybe you do or do not have some of those outlined. I mean, maybe you do, but I'm just very curious, like how you're thinking about what you're doing in terms of what you want to do with herpetoculture.
Yeah. So I think personally, I'd like to kind of explore like captive management or field research like as a career, and I'm kind of working on maybe ultimately getting to that point. Like obviously still like years out from that, but herpetoculture, I think like I see is continuing to be a part of my life, and it's like kind of like a discipline, I think, and it like provides me, like I'm really project oriented, and I think a lot of herp people are, like I love having like something I need to work on, like, and there's always a new thing, and they'll never stop being things that I can add on or change,
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's that, and it's like a meaningful use of my time, but I think it also like provides me with the chance to like interact with these amazing animals too, and and to like learn about them, like both in a captive setting, like seeing their behavior, but also like I become even more invested in doing like research into like their ecology.
Yeah, I like talking about it as a discipline, because it's Roy and I have both opined on that a little bit on this show, and sort of in our own conversations, talking about herpetoculture sort of as an art, as a creative process, as sort of yeah, like discipline is the right word. That's the right word for sure. Kind of always shaving off an imperfection, making small tweaks, and seeing, sort of the deviations that happen as a result of those changes. Yeah, I find that quite satisfying as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
sometimes I even think of it as like a devotional practice, it's like it feels like discipline almost sounds like too like militant, or like
Right, yeah.
like, I'm not to say that that's the wrong word either, because I think that there are aspects of it that require discipline,
Yeah.
but I also think of it like, for me, like when I'm going to tend to the herps, like I don't like the cognitive experience of it, the internal experience of it isn't usually like one of like discipline for me, or like rigor. It's like more like devotion, because I'm just like stoked, and happy about it, and like appreciative of the experience in that way. And of course, then there are the days where you like, your snake's pooped in the water bowl for the third time in like a 6-hour span, and you're kind of like, okay, here we go.
That's the good thing about Euros, man. No water bubbles. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. But yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. I actually think so. I relate to what you're saying, Roy, but I really think discipline for me kind of hits it in a way that, because So like jujitsu is a disciplinary practice, right? It's like this,
Right.
you're like repeating certain movements, you're repeating certain practices, and there might be something sort of meditative in those processes, but it still, to me, feels sort of disciplinary. Well, disciplinary might be the wrong word, but discipline-like, in that when I get here to the shop, there is sort of like a set of like 10 things that I'll do every fucking day. Like every day before anything else. Like I do the same 10 fucking things. And in a way, it's almost as if I can't get started until those 10 things are done. Like I know
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
like I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna, clip on all these lights that don't come on until I get here. I'm gonna check the incubators. I'm gonna do any dishes that I have to do. I'm gonna spray down stuff that, like the tailor eye. I got a female that's gravid over here, the Xenogama tailor eye, and so I have to come in and spray her cocoa fiber down because it dries out overnight. All this stuff that kind of happens, and then it feels like, okay, what are we doing today? But in reality, sometimes those first 10 things is like a lot of work. It's like a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah.
2-3 hours before I get done with those 10 things and say, all right, what's actually on the docket for today? Is it cleaning the exteriors of the enclosures? Is it dusting lights? Is it do I need to pick a few cages and completely change out their bedding because the bedding's getting old, or who knows, whatever,
Right.
you name it, right? But it doesn't, but even when I'm doing those 10 things, there's stuff that happens. Like there's stuff that happens inside those sort of rote tasks that are like a discipline in a way. So I don't know. I kind of relate to what you're saying with that, Max. I like the term discipline a lot.
Yeah, I think it's like a mix of both of those things, like both devotional and I guess, yeah, like you said, disciplinary doesn't sound quite right.
Oh yeah,
Just
then
nice plug, Roy. Um, but yeah, like I think it's like a mix of that. Like I'm able to, like I need to be disciplined enough to, care and provide for the animals. And I think that's really like satisfying to like see them thrive in my care.
Yeah.
But I also I have this like extraordinary privilege of spending time with them and interacting with them in a multitude of ways. And seeing, I think like the ultimate, I guess practice and devotional like practice and experiences, like seeing them exhibit like natural behaviors that I wouldn't have seen otherwise if I hadn't provided them with specific opportunities.
Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. It could be. I mean, I feel like there's such a fun difference between when you have it. Let's say you have some new project that's only a few months old, and you see something very different. You're like, oh man, that's so wicked. Like I never, like for example, I have my tailor eye, and they have like the shortest courtship display. I mean, or like the whole thing from beginning to end is like seconds from beginning of courtship to mating to done. It's so brief. And I hatched quite a few before I finally caught the damn bastards doing their thing. And it was so awesome to see the male's tail come up and wriggle around, because a lot. I don't think a lot of tailor eye keepers know that happens. They have that shield at the bottom, and then the little strip of tail that runs out at the end. And a lot of times in some animals, those tail tips are gone. They're just not there. But when they're intact, they use them and just wriggle it. It actually, in a funny way, kind of resembles like when leopard geckos do it before they lunge at the item, or kind of looks like a mix between that and like Phrynocephalus mystaceus with their little tail curls, in between. And then they pick up the whole butt end of the tail and wriggle it and then chase after the female. But it's this super brief experience. And there's such a pointed difference, I think, between seeing that for the first time, and then seeing an ornate pair mate and do go through their whole courtship, and it's like, okay, maybe I've seen this like several hundred times now, and it's certainly not dull or anything like that. It's no less interesting, and it's like, great, everything's working, they seem happy enough to do this, and what have you. But there is something fun in like the novelty of a new behavior, or a new new behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there's a difference between seeing, like my morning geckos like pseudo copulate, or have, and they're awesome. They're fun to watch. They're like pseudo copulating. They're getting into little spats. They're chirping, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, there's a difference between that and seeing, like the Thrasops mate.
Yeah,
I think there's seeing that behavior for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel like in this too, there's something that like comes to mind for me where it's just like, whenever I have the experience of seeing like novel behaviors like that, whether it's mating or like a certain feeding behavior or whatever, I'm always just like so keenly aware in that moment of just like what a privilege it is to witness that stuff, because like, you can even go like read through, field research of stuff, and like people don't see this stuff. It's like it's really rare. I think like you can look up information about birds, and there's a lot of information out there about like how birds nest and stuff like that, because people have sat there and watched it, and partially because birds, they return to their nests to tend them and to feed the babies and stuff like that. But it's like, how often is somebody seeing the behavior of like a reptile nesting, like a snake laying eggs? It just doesn't happen. Like, you're not going to see that in the field. If you do, it's like an extremely rare event. And like that also just like, I feel in some ways like affirms the value of herpetoculture to the scientific community, is like being able to contribute these kinds of observations that are otherwise just not realistic to observe in a natural setting.
Yeah,
that's a strong point. You know what it also makes me think about too is I'm sure you guys have had this experience where, dude, I love the mug. Yes, dude. It's like the second time I've seen you use the Project Herpetoculture mug. I got mine too. Let me just.
This was a very special gift from Mr. Leitz.
Solidarity.
Nice.
There we go.
Sorry, but so I was just thinking about this the other day, which is we also get the privilege of like reverse engineering a behavior that we've missed sometimes, because sometimes you have to be there to see something happen, right? But then there's other times where you're like, whoa, what happened here? You come through, you go through your, I go through like my checklist of 10 things. One of the first things I do is I walk down the rows of all the cages, and I check every single cage to see if there's anything I need to take care of immediately, right? Like, is there blood on the wall? Like, which that never happens because I keep everything solo, but something along those lines, checking just to see if there's anything that's urgent. And sometimes, every once in a while, I walk by a cage and everything is throttled. Like maybe there's just a pile of dirt that was not there before. Like, you can tell that the animal, something happened, and the animal decided, all right, I need to dig a new burrow. I need to find a new hiding space. I don't like these rocks here. I'm going to kick them away, and then trying to kind of work backwards and say, all right, what happened, and maybe why did it happen? There was one, I had a Thomasi, Eurymestes Thomasi, that was for like a week or two. I was coming in, and I saw these little pockets of, because I keep them on this gravel, this like pea gravel and sand, and I came in, and there were like little pockets all over where you could tell she like scraped it out of the way, and I was like, what? She's not gravid. She's not nesting. It doesn't look like burrowing behavior. It doesn't look like she's trying to, make some new hiding space. Like, what's happening here? And I couldn't catch her out doing anything, because she would usually just come out and eat, and then she'd run around and take a shit, and then she'd go hide, and then do it again another hour later. But I put a little ring camera on her, and in the later evening, so like around 3:30, 4 o'clock, when most everything here is gone for the day, for most of the day anyway, she was popping out and was scraping through the gravel to pull out little bits of hay, Timothy hay, that was left it was like under all the gravel and stuff. And I was like, look at you, you little smart little bastard. She was, oh man, I love seeing that.
Foraging.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
That's so
Foraging.
cool.
Yeah. But I never would have, I mean, I guess I've seen other Euros do that before, but not, it's usually when I've seen them do it, it's been, there's no greens today, so they're going to go and find something else. This was like totally unrelated. She had had her fill of greens and it was at the end of the day, you know, and she kind of threw me through a loop because I just assumed everyone was done. Like I just assumed they never came out after a certain point in time, but they can surprise you from time to time.
That's the good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, moving on. I'm curious, something that Max, you and I have talked about in the past is just kind of the addictive nature of herpetoculture and just like the ever-present urge to find the next thing to work with and all
For
of
sure.
that. And yet, like at this point, you have a relatively small collection. And I know that that's something that you're at this stage moving forward, like trying to grow in like a responsible and kind of thoughtful way. And I'm curious if you could just kind of speak to that, like with your experience of that. What are you considering? Like, do you have a specific focus, like regionally, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I'll speak to the regional focus first. So I'm definitely pretty solidly into like central west afrotropical of arboreal snake species, but also Madagascan snakes as well. Like that's kind of my wheelhouse. And I think there's a lot of other, you know, groups and species and like ecomorphs that are interesting too, but like that is kind of what has stuck with me because I think I really love like diurnal species, you know, like I love being able to, I'm not, you know, like a huge night owl, so I love being able to, you know, go in, the lights are on, I see them out cruising, you know, they're not just in a hide, you know. And I recently I completely forgot to mention, I have a pair of Toxicodryas adamantius, which are they recently got split from the powdered tree snakes. And there's a lot of tree snakes in here. But it's actually pretty different. They look kind of similar to Boega.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. But they were split from Toxicodryas pulverulenta recently. But yeah, those are nocturnal, and that's a whole adjustment for me because I'm like, I never see them, you know, and I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, like this is, you know, I would love to just see them peeking out every once in a while, but it's all still early days for them too. But yeah, like I think that is like a really good fit for me because I like having like large vertical oriented enclosures. I like having the ability to, you know, plant those enclosures and not have them absolutely destroy the foliage. You know, like I really would love to like move further towards, you know, like biotope enclosures like Roy has.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like I guess just like diurnal, I love arboreal. I love being able to like use branches in a really hey Dalva.
Oh
She's
The
so
little flea
big.
girl is here.
man,
She's a big girl now.
She's a beast.
Oh,
Sorry to interrupt the podcast, but
Oh,
it's
you're
important.
good. That's really important.
a worthwhile interruption.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And I think that like those particular regions are just like especially interesting to me. I think there's interesting you know, culture there, but also like ecology. You know, I think there's interesting ecological niches too. And I think it's like relatively neglected in the hobby. Like I think there are a whole lot of individuals focusing on that. I think that just feels right to me to kind of expand into.
That's
Yeah, I
cool.
love that.
What sorry, Roy, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna say, can you speak a little more to what you find so compelling about that particular region?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so like I mentioned, there's a lot of, I mean, obviously there's like a heavy like colonial influence.
Mhm.
So I think culturally it's interesting, and I think it's like important to like understand like the implications of that too when you're like getting I mean, I think especially like venomous reptiles from that area, but that isn't really my wheelhouse. Um, but yeah, there's that you know, history, but also just like ecologically, there's I think those forests in particular, I think like tropical African forests
Mhm.
are I think neglected as far as study. I think there's a lot more information available on the neotropics in particular.
Mm.
And I think it's also, I mean, not that obviously like forests are kind of rapidly disappearing around the world. But like Madagascar is like one of the most deforested places in the world.
For
There's
sure.
some serious habitat loss, even, you know, like dry forests and dry scrub forests and, you know, all of the incredible, just like succulents and scrub that's like in western and like southern Madagascar is like getting destroyed, not to the same extent as like the eastern rainforest, but it's just like rapidly disappearing. And I feel like this is, you know, I don't have, you know, like the financial means to necessarily like travel to those places. But I think I'm able to, I would love to eventually, but at least for now, you know, I can like connect with the ecology, like with these particular animals. Like I think forests have always been like a very kind of therapeutic place for me, you know, like of any type. So I think that's why even just like looking up and seeing like a tree canopy is very like therapeutic to me. And I don't know, I think there's just like some connection there between that and like arboreal species. Like I love just seeing animals just kind of like cruising through branches. It's almost like flying almost, you know, I just think it's super cool.
Yeah, totally.
I can relate to that sensation, but with deserts.
I was gonna say you're not
Yeah.
not a tree guy.
No, I'm a rock, dry rock and harsh sun kind of, you know. But you're right. There is if you find some kind of affection for a specific place, and I think you could probably feel pretty strong affections for lots of different environments, but
Yeah,
there really is something personally about the desert and deserts broadly, obviously, but specifically the American Southwest desert that's just like therapeutic and humbling and like right. Like I don't know how to elaborate it on it much more than that, but they're just like, and it was one of the reasons I love Euros and ornates and stuff, because you know it's basically the same place, man. You know, this is harsh and terrible and intense and kind of cosmic and like just captivating in a way. And it's really cool to hear that you feel something similar for this other area. You know, I like when people talk about what makes a place compelling to them, you know?
yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to like, hear about that. And like, I really admire that kind of orientation and approach to herpetoculture, especially like at the hobbyist level, you know, where it's like, you know, folks who are just like really passionate about a certain region or like the flora or fauna or all the above about a certain place. And in many ways, like it's like kind of a process of exploration of that place to work with species from that region. And I feel like that's kind of an emerging, I mean, it's been there from the outset of herpetoculture, but I feel like it's like emerging with more prominence kind of in this time in herpetoculture. I see more and more people who are kind of doing it in that way and I don't know. I think it's just like a refreshing take on the practice, and on like the journey of herpetoculture. And it also makes me curious about, like, earlier you spoke a lot about you know, witnessing natural behaviors emerge in the species that you keep. And it also makes me curious about, like, what are your personal like metrics for like success in what you're doing? Like, what are the things that you're wanting to see from your animals, and the things that like let you know that you're on the right track as a herpetoculturist.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about herpetoculture for me is that those goalposts are like constantly being adjusted. Like my
Mhm.
metrics for success are like wildly different than they were when I was like 14.
Totally.
Like I would have been happy just like keeping, whatever animal alive at that point. I was so
Mhm.
excited my sand boa was eating. I'm not
Yeah.
like
Of course.
but like I guess at this point, like just like replicate, like you said, replication of natural behavior, and a lot of that is kind of difficult to gauge because there's only so much described behavior. But I think like
Mhm.
utilization of the different cage furniture doesn't feel quite right, but of like
Mhm.
the orientation, setup, the objects inside of the cage, like utilization of those in a way that like is fitting with their like ecology and wild behavior. And there isn't a whole lot of information, necessarily about that. But for instance, like there's boom slang are pretty commonly known as like nest raiders.
Right.
I think Connor talked about this with his episode. He's another excellent Thrasops keeper. He's doing some awesome stuff with all the biotope plants as well. But so I have these. It's like tried to replicate like weaver bird nests with this very specific like woven bird nests that I found online. I ended up ordering, but I was able to see like nest raiding behavior after placing, like quail eggs and chicks and stuff. So that's that kind of like, yeah, like my female Thrasops that I tried it with, like I try to do, feeding enrichment, like foraging. I try to, mix it up, feed a variety of food, but I created scent trails like to the nest, and then she was like poking around. She was like trying to find the entrance for the nest. She was like going all around it, and then it would, it was fixed enough that it would swing a tiny bit, almost like in a tree branch, so that like she would kind of nudge it and then like stop completely, like stock still, and then just like keep her eye on it. And then when it stopped and slowed down, she'd like go back around and she'd try to find the entrance. Then eventually, like once she found that, she just like went absolutely berserk. She just like destroyed all the prey items in there. It was super cool to watch.
Wow,
That's awesome.
that's really, really cool. I would love to have seen that.
Yeah, I actually I have a video I can send you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not that first time, but I think what I was able to capture is her grabbing a chick from there. Yeah, yeah.
That's so cool, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's really it's so interesting to hear about all the different ways. This is like again, we've only done like 10 shows, and
Yeah.
hearing each different person's approach to like, I'm gonna try this, like like, did you see, Roy showed me this, but did you see the meme that Connor made
Oh yeah, with the Eric
Eric's
Haycraft. Yeah.
scaring the shit out of his lizard? But
Yeah.
as funny as that was, that's it's pretty brilliant. It's because there's
Yeah.
all these things that I just would have never considered.
Yeah.
You guys can't hear that car alarm, can you?
I can very, very
Yeah, like
faintly
the
hear
fade,
it. It's
very,
not
very
an issue.
faintly.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
All right, cool. Just making sure.
Can you hear all the like bird noises and stuff here?
No.
No.
Okay, good.
But I will say I can see all the bugs flying around, and there's been a few where I'm like, dude, are you recording on top of a beehive? Because it's like, they look like they're buzzing around.
It's just really buggy here right now. But yeah.
So are you, is it primarily through just spending a lot of time observing your animals that is that where you're getting most of your information as to like, oh, this clearly seems to be working and this clearly seems to be not working, or that, you know, they're doing a lot of this and a little less of that? Is it just raw observation for the most part?
So it's a mixture between that and like reading about their natural history. So I think like when I initially got into herpetoculture, like I had a pretty like limited understanding. You know, like I was very much like, this is my care sheet. There's not really a connection to their ecology.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, like reading, you know, like field guides has been like absolutely crucial. Reading, you know, scientific papers about, you know, their like anatomy, and that comparing that to like other species, like in that instance, like to the boom slang, you know, like there's a lot of overlap as far as like ecological niches there.
Yeah.
So, you know, like comparing that and thinking like, well, you know, I think this like would work, so I'm going to try that. But also just like given how prone they are to like foraging, like they're like incredibly food motivated snakes, like they are, which is why I always have issues like cohabbing them.
Do they cannibalize?
Yeah, not I don't think they would cannibalize if there wasn't like food sense. So this is, I briefly tried cohabbing. Oh, I've cohabbed when I was like pairing them together, so obviously, and I have kept them together for a couple weeks usually, just to like make sure I can like see a visible walk, you know. And I've had pretty minimal issues. I have like 6x2x3 and 5x2x3 bivs for them now. But I've had pretty minimal issues as far as like resource partitioning and use and all that. But as soon as my female in particular, who's a little bit larger than the male, if she smells food on the male, she will absolutely just like go for it. Like she will strike him, she'll start chewing, you know, like I've had to like physically remove her mouth from like the male. It's
That sounds stressful.
It was incredibly stressful, you know, and I tried all sorts of stuff before you know, I didn't like rip her off, you know, but I had to like leverage her off of that. I had my gloves on, you know, I got my thick like welding gloves on, but yeah, I would love to avoid that for sure.
Yeah, this is super sketchy.
Yeah, no, it's like, and like there were, I think Skip Loader was, when reading his notes, like he's had, I guess had, you know, like relatively few issues with cohabbing, like in smaller enclosures too. So I genuinely, I don't know if it's just like my pair, I don't know if it's some like parameter I haven't figured out. You know, like when I do keep them cohabbed for breeding, which, you know, has only been the 2 times, but I have this like weird kind of like fencing thing where I have like the hook in one hand, you know, I like try to keep them both busy with prey items, then I have like my mister in the other hand, and I'm like trying to spray and like hook and like keep them off. And
yeah.
As long as, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, keep going, please.
I was gonna say, as long as like if you get through about like a half hour of that, then you're good. But up until that point, you know, and I even past that half hour, just sit in my chair watching them because I do not trust her.
Yeah.
At all.
So actually, this brings up something I'm really curious about. If you didn't see outright like aggression, so you mentioned the female just latching onto the male, let's say that was out of the picture, would there be certain behaviors that you would treat as, this doesn't feel right, I'm gonna split them up, that's not outright aggression?
Yeah, I think like if I notice absolutely any change as far as like eating, I'd probably split them. As far as like who is, especially if one like went off of food for any reason, you know, if I noticed like a reduction in appetite that wasn't related to like seasonal shifts. I think it would be dependent on like enclosure size too, because I try to keep a decent amount of like cork tube hides in there that are elevated different heights. I elevated water dishes, like lots of branches basically. But I think if I notice that they're having difficulty like basking when they wanted to, like due to like space constrictions, like I think I would remove them for that reason. If I noticed that like issues with like cork tubes and hides, like if I felt like there wasn't adequate space in there, like I think I would remove them. Yeah, I know there's a lot. I feel like I'm still like learning about that as I go. Like I feel like there's still so much, which I think is why they're so interesting. Like there's so much I still don't understand about their behavior.
Yeah.
And I just like I'm not sure if I've like kept them cohabs long enough to really see other like warning signs. But
yeah, that's intriguing to intriguing to me because this is, I don't know why this one comes up for me all the time, but cohabitation is just something I just won't do with Euros. I just, just sort of as a hard line. I mean, and it's, and I've said it before, but I try almost every year I try in some way, shape, or form. I mean, and there's a handful of exceptions, like with Euromastix jayeri and stuff that seem somewhat more tolerant of communal housing, generally speaking. But even in those, there's just big changes that happen when you're housing multiple animals in the same space. And I'm definitely the minority in this. Like most people keep their Euromastics together. And, you mentioned the, I forget his name, but the other gentleman who,
skip loader,
that guy, you say that he cited not having any issues with cohabitation and it's smaller cages. And that's, I think there's probably something really, really intriguing there as to why he didn't see it. And again, I'm not trying to speak to him specifically, and I'm not trying to say anything at all, but like my first instinct when someone tells me that is you weren't paying attention. But that's just my bias, because with Euros, I'm so familiar with with a lot of the small behaviors that they'll exhibit that indicate to me it's time to split you. Like, and it's so visceral for me at this point. Like if I see, hear, notice any of that, it causes me physical discomfort, like there's a specific noise to the way that a Euro will run at a cage wall if it's being attacked by another Euro. There's a very specific sound, and it's just like, whoa, like it just immediately raises the cortisol in my body. And again, I don't want to speak to Skip or I mean, because he knows more than I do obviously about this particular subject, but I'd be really curious if it's maybe he wasn't noticing as much, or possibly was there some other factor there? Like, did it have to do with the smaller enclosures? Did he acclimate them to captivity together, or was it were they solo previously and then he introduced them? I mean, there's so many ways of kind of splitting that atom. I don't know. I don't have something specific in mind, but
I feel really similarly about the stuff that I've been tracking with like the Polycris and also with the Spilotes. And I think cohabitation is just one of those subjects that's just super nuanced and complicated. And like one of the things that I've tried to do to mitigate potential issues with cohabitation is include multiple basking areas in each habitat. So in the 8-foot Spilotes vivarium, there are 3 separate basking platforms, a couple feet apart from each other. And so if the snakes desire, they can actually bask independently and not compete for that resource. And similarly with the Polycris, I have 2 basking areas set up in each of their vivariums. But there's just that's obviously just mitigation for one resource, and like with the Spilotes, when I'm feeding them, it's always been a concern to like make sure that I'm like very on it, I'm ready to go. And thankfully, having an 8-foot vivarium, it's pretty easy to separate them out and feed them individually. And I haven't actually noticed a lot of competition for food. I've never had to grab the same prey item and have to separate them or anything like that. But what I have noticed is that my male, handsome boy, who's going on 15, he's got cataracts, which are slowly, he's slowly going blind. And I've noticed it just in the last couple months. He's just way more reactive with food. And there was one moment where he actually smelled food on one of the other snakes and bit them, and then realized it wasn't food and let go. But it was one of those situations where it was like, okay, there's another layer of complexity, where it's like he can no longer see, as clearly, and so he's not relying on his vision as like a primary method for identifying prey. It's like all about scent now. And so that just is another layer to consider. And I think it just really, again, emphasizes the complexity of these kinds of considerations when you're working with things in numbers like that.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think it's really dependent on not just like species but individual animals. Like I've had like zero issues cohabiting like the leaf nose snakes, the Madagascan leaf nose snakes, because they like they're lizard eaters, but I've noticed like none of those warning signs that I'd look out for. And I think it's partially due to their smaller size. They're like kind of different approaches to foraging and striking at prey and like what they'll eat. Like Thrasops are really generalists, but lots of like avian reptile prey. And they're all like very movement oriented, but even just like the way the Langaha move is completely different to how the Thrasops move. And it's like very different from any like lizards I'd be feeding. They're a lot less keyed in on that too.
Sure.
Like they're kind of like
that makes sense.
waving back and forth, like the whole like vine snake swaying in the wind, kind of thing. Especially if there's I have like computer fans for ventilation on there, and they're like, especially if those have kicked on, they're like swaying back and forth. And they're not.
That's so cool.
Yeah, they're not ever, like moving as quickly. They can move really quickly if they want to, and they forage sometimes. But I've never noticed that kind of like feeding response or issues that I've had with the Thrasops.
Yeah. As so I also have the Xenogomma taylori, as I mentioned before, and when I started keeping them, and I had kept them a little bit when I was in college, all of the care guides out there said they're great in groups. They're just fine in groups. And clearly they are pretty social. Like they're a lot more social than the Euros. Well, maybe not a lot more social, but I guess they clearly seem to spend more time in, in little communities and sort of somewhat more tolerant of one another to a degree. But one of the problems I'm encountering is that I'm starting to find that a lot of those animals I have to house solo as well, depending on the exact ones, because I had one male just absolutely mutilate the arm of a female, and it was like the stakes are so high because if the consequences on offer are that one of the animals can kill the other sufficiently, then it becomes extremely stressful for me to even allow them to be together without supervision at all. Like it's because, if it's going to happen once in a while, that's too much for me. It's one thing, because a lot of the folks who talk about, at least in Euromastics anyway, there were guys who used to say things like, well, the pairs that I have that are somewhat aggressive towards one another tend to breed better. And I have a lot of questions for that particular line of thinking. But even if I were to take that as, okay, I'm just going to take that as anecdata and say, yeah, you're okay, maybe there's something there. the little shit, the little tiny, little stuff of like, occasionally there's chasing, and occasionally they bite each other's toes because it's like a little aggressive, like I'm gonna bite your toe, or sometimes they bite each other's sides, and it's negligible. It's like, well, to me, that's not really negligible. That's important. That comes up. There's a reason that's happening, and I don't think it's as simple as it's tolerable, it's normal, especially if if it's not very well spelled out where they're going to cross the line from just being aggressive a little bit and now we're killing each other up here. Like it's
yeah, totally.
It feels really uncomfortable, and again, I don't mean that to say anything disparaging about my good friends who cohabitate their Euros. I'm not trying to say they shouldn't necessarily. It's just, there's certain risks that I just don't want to take. And it's hard when you're working with something that may not be very well described, or maybe was described for a long time, but inaccurately so, and now you're finding yourself having to make choices like solo housing, which isn't necessarily economical and isn't, and isn't necessarily easy. Yeah, again, I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but
yeah, like I agree with that. Like, I think when I initially like got the Thrasops, like I kept them separate for the quarantine period, and then I was planning on just cohabiting them permanently, because I had heard that there were relatively few issues. I plan on giving like a relatively large vivarium. I'm sure they would absolutely use a much larger space, and I wish I had an entire room to give them.
Sure.
But yeah, like I just was not prepared going in, and then I've adjusted. Like I've had to get additional enclosures set up, but I didn't know that going in.
Right.
These things that we learn along the way.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Good curveballs to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to double the vivarium display space that I had in mind before. It's like, oh, okay.
Oops.
Yeah.
But I mean, these are the kinds of things that, we have to take into stride and figure out a way to make it work for the benefit of the animals.
Yeah.
Right. That's absolutely right.
I can't keep it in a 20-gallon.
Yeah, see, that's there are people that would say you could, but should you?
Right.
It gets complicated quick.
Yeah.
Well, on that kind of vein, I'm curious, just like really like zooming out and like looking at herpetoculture more broadly, I'm curious, like from your perspective, as someone kind of like somewhat like newer to the hobby, to the practice, like what are the aspects of herpetoculture that you most enjoy? And like, the other side of that coin, what are the aspects of herpetoculture that you feel personally conflicted about, or that like, you have gripes about?
Yeah, for sure. So I think like I love the I love the sense of community, and that obviously there's like a dark side to that too that I'll kind of expand on. But there's that sense of community and like collaboration, like you're working together with these complete strangers that you wouldn't have met otherwise. Like I would never know Roy, if it weren't for like puffingsnakes.com, like
Shout out.
and it's this like there's the Facebook group, the Thrasops group in particular is like it feels like what I feel like herpetoculture should be. It's like a collaborative effort. Everyone is like very transparent about the methods and techniques they're trying. It's a pretty positive environment. It's like, I think part of that is because it's not like a huge group and it's a pretty like niche species. So anyone, who is keeping them is pretty invested in doing it in a way that's healthy for the animals. And I think seeing like how the tech has advanced even from like, you know, like when I was keeping like as a kid, you know, like there's just a whole leaps and bounds beyond that. And a lot of that is just like, I just didn't know, you know, like I didn't necessarily understand how to properly heat an enclosure. You know, I don't understand ventilation, humidity, you know, but seeing like the ingenuity that I think like a lot of, I mean, I think there's like a really strong DIY element too, like the ingenuity. Like I love how there's all these issues that are often like very, very climate and location specific. Like I have completely different keeping parameters to someone, like even just like Connor, you know, Connor's like in Texas. He has like very different things that he has to worry about compared to like me. And you know, even like prior to me moving, I had a completely different, even just like based on like the room you're keeping in, there's individual parameters.
Oh yeah.
And seeing how everyone has like figured these out, you know, like all of their solutions are really interesting. And I think even if they aren't like directly applicable, you know, I think you can like learn from that. There's just like, you're constantly able to learn about anything, even if it's, you know, just like some really niche like heat light thing, you know, like halogen issue. But yeah, and I guess like negative, there's a lot of like, I feel like dick measuring, you know, there's a lot of like, frankly, like there's a lot of like competitive like bullshit that just like does not need to be there. Like I don't know why it's that deep. It's not, you know, like I'm here to like learn about these animals, just like make friends, you know, essentially. And then there's people who just like are not interested in constructive criticism, you know, are not interested in providing for their animals. I think that's like maybe what's most like upsetting to me is just to like not, you know, like new keepers. Like I think I mean I've like killed plenty of animals, unfortunately, you know, like there's absolutely like room for improvement, and I don't expect like new keepers to come in, you know, with this like crazy setup. But people who are like willfully like ignorant about like the ecology and natural history of the species that they're keeping and are just like not receptive to learning more about that, or even like really interested in the animal, I think is the biggest thing. Like I just don't understand, you know, like why you'd have it, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely a set of keepers who feel like they're really wanting an ornament more than a living creature in their house.
Yeah, and I think there's just like it's I mean, I think you guys touched on it prior, but like it's definitely like a privilege. Like it's not a God-given right to have these animals, and it's like absolutely a privilege to like, you know, be in such close proximity to them. I think like that part of that is also just like, you know, social media, not to just like, you know, harp on about that, but like there's
harp on about
it. I mean, there's definitely like issues with how that interacts with like just people being assholes. And there's any kind of like communication issue like that. But and I think there's a lot of like ethical issues too. Like there's some serious ethical like considerations when you're like keeping any animal in captivity. And I think there's, you know, not that like I mean, I think like people should at least be like aware of those and like consider those, you know, like there's a lot of times where I wonder like why do I have these, you know, like I love having them, you know, and like what right do I have to just like have this thing in a PVC box in my house, you know?
Yeah, dude, yes, this is a very common recurring theme, not just in the people we've spoken with on the show, in friends of mine for years. It's been like there comes a point where if you and I think it was Jordan Russell who I was talking with about this at one point, that like if you're not regularly having internal conversations with yourself about whether or not you ought to or deserve to do this, you're probably doing it wrong, you know. And I felt like that was pretty profound, you know, and it because it's like Don't get me wrong, like I think there's great reasons. I think there's very,
Right.
very good
Yeah,
reasons,
absolutely.
but I think it shows a strength of empathy, a strength of character, to admit when, because it shows you care about the animals, you care, these are not an ornament. There's something that you respect profoundly. I'm sorry, I keep looking over because
You're good.
there's a group of ornates that are trying to determine if they're fighting or not, and it's stressing me out. But
You're good.
but like
As you're talking about empathy.
right, I did too. It's the worst. I can't. It's such a horrible sound. I hate the sound,
Mhm.
and like I hate seeing. I hate going over to the cage and seeing one Euro ripping away and another just running it down. It really gets to me.
Mhm.
But really, like there is, Max, like what you're saying, there really does seem to be some kind of stark division between the folks who want, and the want is paramount to any other piece of rationale that you could come up with to say, and then there's the folks who are like, look, there's lots of reasons I could think of not to do this.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
you know what I mean? But and that's okay. Like there's, those reasons are a motivating factor. Those reasons why not are some of my reasons to do much, much better. Like
Yeah.
and it yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely relate to all of that the both of you have said on this, and just feel like, yeah, there's value in like looking at that kind of introspection and just like consideration as a virtue, and within herpetoculture. I think that yeah, it is something that drives progression, and is helping, ideally helping us to advance what we're doing, in terms of our care and our husbandry. And I mean, I often feel like, I'll be like writing an article or something, or like a blog or something about reptiles, and like I'm like, whenever I encounter the word captivity, I'm kind of like, I kind of cringe a little bit because it's a
Yeah.
gross word, that's an intense word. It's a weighted word.
We should
And
we should appropriate some other word for it instead. Be like, oh, when keeping reptiles in the home or something.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Maybe animals at home.
Oh,
oh yeah. Dylan, let's go. That was well played. Really good.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was so spot on. Don't mind me. I'm just gonna
Go
shove
for it.
Yeah, go for it.
But yeah, but like I feel like, yeah, there's a part of me that like does want to like look for other terminology, but then there's another part of me that's like, no, I want to kind of like uh sit with the discomfort
Yeah.
that this stirs in me, in a way, and not to like, feel bad about myself or about my animals, because I'm constantly striving to do right by them. And obviously, like if I'm continuing to do herpetoculture as I am, um I I I don't feel entirely reconciled about it, but I don't feel like it's wrong either. I think
Yeah.
it's complex. And um I think that, yeah, I guess all of it just to say that I think that there's a lot of value in exploring that complexity. And like what's coming to mind right now too is also just like remembering that, like, I think it is important at the end of the day to acknowledge that, you know, it's an ethnozoological function, as Philippe de Vogely would say, and so it's serving our ends. And that said, like, I think that there are ways in which we can be creative as people and as hobbyists and professionals within herpetoculture to also benefit
the herpetofauna itself, and
Yeah.
whether that's, you know, our or hopefully it's ideally, you know, in an ideal world, we're both benefiting their wild counterparts in some way by supporting conservation or you know, contributing to the kind of like broader understanding of these species, and or we're seeking to improve the conditions of the animals in our care at home.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you please.
I was gonna say I feel like I try to use that as like motivation as fuel to like constantly improve my husbandry. You know, and I think there's like absolutely like utilitarian considerations, especially at like larger scales. But at least for me, like since I am keeping at such a small scale, I'm really like trying to just constantly improve that. And I think it's like I think even maybe even like the more conflicted I become, like the greater my and the more I see like reptiles and amphibians in the wild, like I've been field herping more as well recently. That has like really made me like interrogate like why and what species and like how I'm keeping these animals. But yeah, I think like it's really critical to interrogate that and then use that as motivation to just improve.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys on this. There is something though that stands out to me in what Philippe said about the herpetoculture serves our needs. Obviously, that's dead on. He's 100% right. I just don't think it's maybe this is something I've been thinking about a lot over the last couple of years, which is like maybe that's also like an incomplete view in the sense that there are other needs being served as well. Like their needs are also being met.
Right.
And we may be like the process of domestication. And I know that there's okay, so this opens up like a whole nother can of worms because we have famous thinkers who talk about things like corn, soy, dogs, koi, bonsai, all these animals that have attached themselves to us. And yes, it's the reasons they've done so have been because we have some weird fascination with them. That's not necessarily anything that immediately benefits them, but yeah, corn and soy are everywhere, and it's an evolutionary success for them to have done such a thing to attach themselves to us. Now, obviously, there's huge concerns with monocrop agriculture and factory farming and the treatment of food animals and things like that. Obviously, all that stuff goes without saying. But I feel like herpetoculture is the start of all of that, with hopefully a better future in mind. Just for reptiles and amphibians, some of these animals that we're bringing into captivity, into the home, are they are the sort of the lucky few, for lack of a better way of putting it, that will lead to something that's quite different, something that doesn't resemble the wild animal identically anymore, but has changed as a result of being lucky enough, again, for lack of better terminology here, to have attached themselves to the human species in some way. And this particular note of domestication in that regard gives me a lot of relief in some way, like I don't, because there's something and of course I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, okay, I because there's a whole set of keepers who don't want anything in the home to not resemble the wild. It's got to have locality specific rocks and plants and diet. The dominant goal is the wild type, and that's the only thing that matters. And I have a hard respect for that as well. At the same time, I feel like that style of keeping has a ceiling, in the sense that if the whole goal is to just replicate the wild exclusively and not change something or tweak something, you're always going to fall short, and it feels a little more ethically fraught from my view, at least in some way. Whereas if we're honest about this and we say, dude, this is something different altogether. What we're doing is
Right.
very, very different. Then it opens up the field to something that resembles a partnership more, and resembles something that you're not going to be, you're not forcing a square peg into a round hole anymore. At some point, you're
Right.
shaping that peg so it fits, you know, like
Yeah.
I'm whittling the peg a little bit so that way it fits into the round hole. And I'm not, you know, I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
Totally.
makes sense. And I think like some degree of like, you know, maybe domestication is the wrong word, but out of like domestication is like inevitable. Like I think there like we're placing a completely different set of like parameters on, you know, the individuals that survive than like the wild would, you know, like
Yeah.
especially species that have been in captivity for a while, like, you know, like corn states, leopard geckos, ball pythons, all that kind of stuff. Like the animals that are surviving in the wild are very different from the ones that like we're maintaining, you know. And I wonder at some point like how ethical, you know, like maybe like force feeding animals to keep them alive, like that kind of stuff is, you know, just like to maintain. I mean, I understand like losing an animal is difficult, absolutely, but you know, like is that, you know, detrimental to like the gene pool ultimately as far as like the captive management is concerned? But yeah, like I think like even unintentionally, like we are selecting for certain things within like captive animals that like are inherently different from the wild. I think it's like
Totally.
I like that kind of way of understanding herpetoculture like almost as like a form of agriculture, but I think it's like we need to, you know, conceptualize it and like strive towards something that like more closely resembles like permaculture. I feel like there need to be, it needs to be something that's like sustainable long term, both like for, you know, like the animals and ourselves, you know, and it's like ethical, I think.
Oh
So
yeah.
you need to consider all of that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more there, man. It's like even and even though I say all of that, even though I see what I'm doing is something that isn't necessarily meant to replicate the wild per se.
Yeah.
That's obviously where I'm getting my information.
Right. Yeah.
It's just
Totally.
like humans. Like Roy and I talk about this all the time now. This whole you know, the human animal was, you know, evolved on the savannah, but we find ourselves in a city. So all right, well, okay, so maybe I have to go like lift weights and run around, whereas my ancestors didn't have to do that, but I have to do that, right? So it's like, what am I gonna have to do with these animals, with these Euros, right? Like, okay, do they live in roofing tiles in the wild? If I put them out there, I bet they would, but no, they don't.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Absolutely.
yeah, and so the like I still have to be informed by natural history and ecology, and understanding the animal's role, where they come from, and like you, but also like you were just mentioning, Max, I feel like this is you hit on something really big there, which is we as keepers are totally imperfect selection mechanisms. I've said before that I don't believe in runts. I don't believe that a runt is a thing, and you know, because if you have a clutch of 20 lizards and 19 of them hatch on Monday, and there's a giant bird that's there and eats all 19 of them because it figured it out, and then the bird flies away because it's full, and then the one that hatched out late, a little small, a little weaker looking, or whatever, pops out on Tuesday, dodged the bird, and lives on to bone down and propagate its species, right? Like
yeah, absolutely.
That's you can't control for that kind of randomness and chaos. You can't account for that in your calculus as a keeper, and that extends out into, I mean, you could subdivide this infinitely in some ways. Like I'm technically selecting for ornate Uromastics that do well in my conditions in Colorado. That might be very different, not just in terms of local environment, but local availability of groceries. Like what groceries can I find at the store that someone in Memphis can't? right? I mean, or, you know, who knows, maybe that's a little broad, but you know, and then just there's, you know, we know enough about the human brain that we know that there are so many things, so many choices that happened way, way, way below the conscious level.
Mhm.
How many and what kind, how many and what kinds of things are happening with our animals that we're just not cognizant of. We're not,
Mhm.
we can't be cognizant of for one reason or another, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Totally. I feel like I don't know, to stir the pot a little bit more on this. I think like when you were speaking to like going back to what Philippe was saying,
Yeah.
and I think that there's another aspect of it too, which is that like um herpetoculture is relevant in this context, but the reality is that like this is the context of like human civilization, and it's
Mhm.
not the only context that humans have existed. You know,
Right.
like, and I think about like, you know, in some ways like domestication predates civilization, you
Oh, yeah.
know.
Oh yeah.
And so it's like, you know, were there early peoples pre-civilization that were like playing with reptiles? Who knows? You know, I don't know.
Surely
Maybe,
had to,
probably.
had to.
But I think
Had
about like this is like something that I feel about on so many levels. Like so many of the conflicts that we see hotly contested and debated in like modern society are kind of like these like moral dilemmas that I feel like are questions about like, is this relevant, you know, or is this necessary? And in a lot of ways, it's like, well, I think the answer to that is always like yes, because it's here. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
like it's
Totally.
relevant because it's already in the mix. You know, it's
Yeah.
like say what you want about like the existence of drugs or like the existence of like sex work, you know, or like all
Right.
these things that are like complicated things, you know.
Yeah.
And you can look at herpetoculture as one of these complicated things. It's like
Highly
I
pluralistic.
don't I don't think the debate is so much like should this exist or not.
Right.
Because like the reality is the cat's already out of the bag. It's here.
Right.
And it's here to stay. At least within the context of civilization until we like are in some other thing where all of these considerations are totally irrelevant.
Yeah.
The reality is they're relevant, they're here now. And so then I think it creates like a different imperative and a different kind of set of questioning that emerges from that, which is like, well, then how can we make it as good, as thoughtful, as ethical, as you know, well as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like in some ways like that kind of feels liberating for me as someone who like can sometimes have these like internal conflicts around herpetoculture. You know, it's helpful to remember that it's like, you know, regardless of my involvement in this or not, it's here.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I may as well be like an active participant and a proactive participant in this endeavor, you know, and seek to contribute something of value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Damn, dude, dropping hot fire over.
Yeah. Drop the
Yeah.
mic.
Well, and there's also like a highly, you know, if I'm going to take the competitive angle, which I tend to do because of I like winning, you know, but like I know I've harped on this in a previous episode. Actually, I think it was our launch episode with Dylan where I said, you know, don't tread on me, or because I can isn't enough. But
Mhm.
I am also motivated and moved by arguments such as, you know, when people suggest why we can do this, or why, you know, why do you want to do that, or why, you know, like what's your rationale, or what value do you get out of it? It's like I can ask that about a lot of completely
Mhm.
acceptable, culturally instantiated institutions that are like, I'm like,
Mhm.
why should you be able to make a fucking soda, jerk ass? Like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you get to just make this drink that has all this sugar and shit in it that's not good for you and whatever. But like, no one's asking whether or not you should, right?
Mhm.
No one's asking whether or not you should have like a hot rod, or you should be able to base jump, or you should be able to whatever, like you name it, man. Like why the screw? I can ask you, why should I be allowed to have Bengal cats that,
Right.
if I let them outside, would absolutely mutilate the local environment? It's just because they would, I promise you. And it's obviously that's, Roy, what you were saying was much more spot on, because this level of argumentation that I'm making now doesn't take into account that these are living animals, right? It doesn't incorporate their experience, their feelings, their concerns, their needs. But it feels a little bit like, as you said, the cat's out of the bag, right? So if we're already doing this, like I remember very early on when I come back from Seattle, and I had tried living in Seattle for a short period of time, and then I came back, and I had temporarily I had one pair of Uromastyx at the time, and it was my Uromastyx Thomasii pair, and I had left them at my mom's place just to, as temporarily, it was going to have her send them out to me once I'd gotten established in Seattle. But everything fell apart out there, and I came back, and I had decided at that point in time, and it's like, all right, I'm going to do a lot more of this, and I'm going to take it a lot more seriously. And I remember one of the things I thought about was, somebody has to set a good example in this, and of course there were lots of people setting good examples well before I got involved, but like that is an ongoing engagement, like if there aren't new people getting involved all the time, if there aren't younger up and coming folks who are thinking about these things, articulating them to themselves and to the people they care about, broadcasting these things on any available platform, I just don't. Like, you have to. You just absolutely have to.
Yeah, it has to progress. Like it has to. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
important.
Damn it.
Well, I love that. I love this kind of consideration. Just grateful for what you're both bringing to this right now.
Yeah, ditto. So Max, to get a little less philosophical, I want to ask you. So you mentioned field herping, and I feel like a lot of the field herping I've done in the American Southwest has very much informed what I do here. If that's the case for you, can you talk about some of the ways that field herping has influenced your keeping style?
Yeah, for sure. So I think, like, I've never been to the American Southwest. Like, furthest west I've ever been has been Colorado, actually. So I have a kind of a different frame for that.
Sure.
My herping is mostly, like Eastern Kansas, Ozarks, like Mid-South, basically.
Yeah.
So, and I had a really formative experience, like, in the Ouachita Mountains in Arkansas, like, as like a 14 or 15-year-old, just like catching salamanders out there. I had this like one specific trip with my dad that was really formative. But yeah, and I think, like, I've only like recently kind of started with, like, there's a mutual friend that Roy and I have, like, in Eastern Kansas, and I was like, prior to moving, I was doing a lot of herping, in the Flint Hills. We were doing all sorts of like Lemprepeltis, like all that kind of stuff, which was incredible. And I think what's even more maybe in my wheelhouse is like going back to those salamanders. Like, I started herping again, and then I found these cave salamanders in Arkansas that just like blew my mind, like Eurycia ossifuga. They're just like in this seep, in they have this extreme, like ecological niche.
Sick.
And it's just like, they're gorgeous animals, and I was like just amazed by them. But I think like that salamanders specifically have kind of been shaping that more. But I think, like, maybe my greatest like takeaway from that is that I'm seeing like to what a degree these animals are like inhabiting ecological niches. So like the exact like there's such specific microhabitats for salamanders especially. Like there are, species that are only, in a very specific like range and elevation, in seeps with specific, rocks or, specific kinds of clay, and you have to know that information if you want to like actually find these animals. Like you're not going to otherwise unless you get really lucky. And I like thinking about that has made me like reconsider like the niches that I'm providing, because like essentially like what we're doing at captivity is providing them with like a single niche. We can provide like a range of temperatures and humidity, and we want them to exploit those different areas as best as they can. We want to provide that range so they can pick within that. But just by virtue of like the size of enclosures that like most people are providing, like we are not able to provide, like a hillside. We're not able to provide like acres of habitat. Like it's still like a relatively stable environment. And depending on keeping style, but I think there's that limitation. So it's made me, I guess, like want to zero in even more specifically on like the kind of microhabitats that the animals that I'm keeping, thrive in.
That's pretty brilliant. That we're it's one niche as a that's really great. I like that quite a lot. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like one of the revelations I had when I started herping out in the deserts here, specifically looking for chuckwallas and collared lizards, was okay. So, when people keep a lot of animal, like a desert lizard, a lot of people, it's like, will say, oh, you got to give it a lot of hiding places, and people will just get like these overturned caves or like little, just little kind of one-dimensional, hiding spaces. And when you actually get out and look at the way a desert lizard that is crevice dwelling or a boulder obligate spends its time, it's not just that there are countless spaces underneath stuff. It's in between crevices at different angles. And what becomes a hiding place changes as the day moves along, and so it's like this it's really quite three-dimensional. It's in the round entirely. And so that led me here anyway to start using the roofing tiles that I've mentioned, and then other objects in conjunction with one another, to give like 2 or 3 dozen hiding places of various shapes, sizes, angles, orientations, temperatures, humidity levels in one spot, because it's actually not that hard to provide that in the desert anyway. It's really not that hard to provide that with just a pile of rocks, for lack of a better way of putting it. And another one is one thing I do a lot here is I open up all the doors and I put a lot of animals out in the sun at various times for various reasons. And there's one thing that I just had never been able to get my animals to do, because I'm not equipped for it, even when I put them outside. And I just started having it happen a few weeks ago, because my front door opens, and if you let the sun, if I leave the door all the way open and the sun is setting sufficiently, it like shoots right in the front door, like at a horizontal angle. And my baby ornates were sitting up on their rock, doing the thing where they're holding themselves up like on all fours, which is my favorite thing, and they were facing the sun. That's the best. And they can't do that when it's a dome. They're never gonna do it.
So cool.
I was just like, look at them, they're doing the thing. It got me really hyped up, as you can tell.
That's the good stuff.
It was good shit, man. I was dying watching him do it, because and I don't know how to. I guess I'd have to do what Eric was talking about, which is
just thinking,
put the bulb horizontally. What I just want somebody to build like a $5,000 track light that not only goes over like this, but also rotates in a circle. You know what I mean? So I can do it it'll be
like those camera rigs where you get them,
Yes.
you know, like
Yes, dude.
I know what you're
Somebody
talking about.
Somebody put a high-powered UV emitting heat lamp on that damn thing and let me use it for the lizards. I said,
That would be the best.
You're just gonna
We'll
like
get
live.
there someday.
Yeah.
You're gonna live in the like Henry Doorly like desert dome in like 10 years.
That's actually that would be a much better way to go about it. I really should, you know, eventually maybe I'll do that, but that's intimidating.
Yeah, it's a lot of glass.
Yeah.
But both of your
sorry, go ahead, Roy.
Oh no, sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No, you didn't.
I was just gonna say that like what both of you are speaking to about just like field observations, and I experienced this myself with field herping here, which is like it makes me feel like that's kind of like the next frontier for me as a herpetoculturist with the species I keep is to like go try and see them, you know, in their native ranges.
Yeah.
And like I think especially because I'm kind of approaching a point where like my collection isn't really going to be growing very much anymore. Like I've kind of maxed out space and just kind of what I feel like I can reasonably do is like I'm pretty close to that threshold. Maybe not quite there, but close. And I think when I do get to that threshold, what I want to start doing is like instead of focusing on like again growth of the collection is actually like focusing on like going out to where each of these species that I work with comes from and making the attempt to see them, because I think that there's like you say, like we're replicating just we're replicating one niche that they're using in our homes, and I'm working on it there, and like I think that in a way we can kind of like get a pretty nuanced feel for what those niches are like if we experience them out in the wild. Like I think about how like a lot of species that I know well from just growing up where I live and going field herping a lot, it's like very often I'll be like in a place and I'll feel like, okay, this feels like the right place to see this species, and then there it is. And that's like, a lot of it isn't even stuff that I can maybe like cognitively describe. It's just like a felt sense. And I think that like, I would love to get to the place where I could experience that felt sense with the species that I'm actually working with at home. So I could try to replicate that feeling in this,
Yeah, but
it's impossible.
No, I don't know. So we my friend Nick Dokai and I, who he used to do a lot of chucks and collared lizards and such. When we would go herping, one of the things we would do is we'd be walking around and we'd be like, man, that rock pile right. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that rock pile right there. That's got to have a chuck in it for sure. It has to. It's just like perfect. It's perfect. And you go over and you look and there's nothing. You just, all right, well, I was wrong.
I just I went on a trip out to like northern Alabama, to look for salamanders. I was looking for like green salamanders, that was super cool, my favorite species. But I was like, I spent like a whole entire day just like going to what I thought was perfect habitat for these animals, and I was like shining all these crevices, I'm like, this is the rock, this is the formation, this is the exact crevice, like it looks perfect, it's just humid enough. And then I like look in there and there's like absolutely nothing.
Man. There was another one when we were in California, we were in Southern California, and we were looking for chucks, and it was shining the cracks just like you're talking about. And I shined in one and I was looking real close and like my face, it's like right here, looking, and right in front, right at the entrance to the crevice was a night lizard.
Oh, nice.
Like, oh, whoa, what a trip. Like what are the odds that you would just stumble upon something you weren't looking for like that? Like that was, I very much enjoyed that. I really, God damn, man. I don't think I'm going to be able to get out, do any field herping this year other than out east in Colorado. But I really want to. And I actually want to go to Appalachia. Like I've been telling my fiance, I want to go to Appalachia and look for salamanders because you know, when I was a little kid, I was born in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
We moved here to Colorado when I was like right before I turned 6 years old. But I used to rip around the backyard and find salamanders along with the garter snakes and other stuff. And I really would like to reconnect with that little bit of exploration I did as a kid and take it to a level of what I'm doing today, which is more specific and more interested and more pointed and more articulate. And I feel like Appalachia would be the place to do that, for salamanders anyway. But
Absolutely, yeah.
so what that means is we got to take a herp trip. We'll go to
I'm telling you.
We're gonna go to Appalachia, and then we're gonna go to the Amazon. And I can get us around because I have a little bit of Portuguese and I can do jujitsu down there. So we can go see the puffy snakes, and then we got to go to Oman or Egypt or Israel.
Yes.
Because the thing about Oman is you can find 3 Euro species all in the same place. So
Oh, nice.
Thomasai, Egyptian microlepis, and Benti. So
Wow.
yeah,
Cool.
it's the only place. I don't think there's any other place where you can find multiple species like that in one region. So we'll do it. Let's just do that. Let's just go tomorrow.
We will.
That's fine.
I'm serious about this. This is all gonna happen.
So am I. I mean,
Make it happen.
Yeah.
I'm being 100% over honest right now. It's just I just want to go tomorrow. I'm really impatient.
I know.
You know, it's
I
hard.
know.
Yeah.
It's hard to wait around for stuff you want to do.
I'm excited for the Appalachia trip though.
Yeah.
Go link up with Max, get Charlie out there, go find some slime otters.
Yeah. I want to see a hellbender so bad.
See a what?
I would love to see a hellbender. Like how that's like there's something like mythological about those, like especially like the Ozark hellbenders, because like
Yes.
you know they like
Yes.
in the state that I like, you know, I spent a lot of time in Colorado, and then I like ended up moving to Missouri, but like they're there, you know, and I saw these stories, you know, and I've seen them in captivity, but it's just like not the same. Like I would love to just like,
Mhm.
you know, be walking around and I'm like, holy shit, like there's a hellbender, you know, like
Yeah.
I'd lose
man.
my mind.
That would be so much
Like-
fun.
It's like seeing a cryptid, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like
seriously.
mythological, like you said.
Seriously.
Absolutely. Well, this is I'm very much enjoying this conversation, and I think I don't know about you, Roy, but do you think now's the time for the one?
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So
Lay
Max,
it on Max.
yeah, you might know already, but we have this one question that we ask everybody. And feel free to take this as broadly or as specifically as you like. But can you talk a little bit about why herpetoculture? Like why that could be why, not just why do you do it, but like why do it in the first place? Why why do any of us do it? And I also understand that a lot of us might just agree by default with Philippe's because it's good for us. We like it. That's fine too.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also cool. Yeah. And actually, by the time this one comes out, this will already be out. But Phil Tremper said it's a mental illness. So
It's a disease.
it's a disease. So it's just nothing you can do, and there's no cure. So so for
That
you,
feels just as accurate. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's like all of that, all the above. Like, I think it's like, I don't know. Like, I've always kind of done it. I can't imagine like not doing it really. You know, like even the periods of my life where I was like less, you know, like pointedly interested in it, less like acutely, you know, interested in it. Like I was still, you know, keeping some species, you know, and I think it's really, for me, it's like, you know, like incredible to like get to spend in such like an intimate way like this time with these animals, you know, and have like, you know, as much as you can have like a personal relationship with like a snake. You know, like I know obviously like they don't really care that I'm there. You know, they don't care about me. That's fine though, you know.
yeah.
But it's cool to
They
just
care
like
if you're holding the food tongs.
they do, yeah. Yeah. And I care if I'm wearing the gloves or not. But yeah, I think it's like I get to see some incredible behaviors. I think like if I could like instantly teleport, you know, anywhere in the world for free, you know, I don't know if I'd want to do it, you know, if I could just see everything in the wilds, like for free, yeah, like absolutely, like I just do that instead. But this is
Yeah.
this is almost as good.
Yeah.
Well
You know,
said. Yeah.
that's really beautiful. I like that quite a bit. It just as a little side thing, I'm not convinced that they don't care about us. I'm still not convinced by them. Oh, there she is again. Dalva, what up?
Sweetie.
What a legend. Look at that smile. Oh man.
She's such a wolf.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah, I'm not convinced, man. I mean, I feel like you said it right when you said that we have a relationship with these guys. I mean, these Euro, I mean, just because my Euros have legs and arms, maybe makes it a little more relatable than a snake in some way, but technically snakes are higher up or further along and down the evolutionary ladder than a lizard, so surely they've got some of the same, if not all the same and more feelings and emotions and whatnot.
Yeah.
I feel like my animals, they know. I mean, they the subtle ways that they show me that they know what's up, like take a closed fist and they come ripping over like they expect food. And then I open up my hand and there's nothing in there. And they're like, and they look around, they're like, this is weird. And then they turn around and run away or like I've posted a little video recently of an ornate of mine who's like totally cool with me being in the cage and around, and she's pissed the second you try to touch her at all. And so you know what I mean? But it's funny because she it's so quirky the way she does it. You go to reach and touch her and she'll just kind of flit and move like 10 inches away from you and then just look. And then like split, and then she runs away a little bit further, and then if you do it like 3-4 times, then she's like fuck this and goes into a deep hide where I can't mess with her. But I feel like I think they insofar as maybe care is not the right word, but like the fact that they take notice, I think is what's really, that feels beautiful. Like I love that I have that opportunity. Like it would be so much less fulfilling if they didn't, but they really do. They know that you're there. They're paying attention to you. They're reacting to you. They're engaging with you. And the more you open up your perceptive flexibility, the more, and sure, some of it's going to be misinterpretation, but some of it's 100% legitimate, like I fucking love that part of the interaction, so yeah, sorry, anyway, don't mean to
that's good.
change the topic too much or whatever, but I anyway, Roy,
That's the good stuff.
yeah,
I think that's it's a good episode. Thank you both.
that's probably the close right there. We're north of 2 hours now, so that's impressive. Time flies, dude. I'm telling you, it just flies by when we're having these conversations. Yeah. Well,
Max, where can people find you?
I'm on. I mean, I'm like on. I don't really have like too much of a social media presence, but I'm like on Facebook, just Max Staab. And I'm like my Instagram, which is like I don't post super regularly, but it's like Langaha12. Haven't come up with anything catchier yet, but
you post more regularly.
I know. I've been trying to post some salamanders, but
for those of us who want to know, you should. You got to post.
Inquiring minds.
Even if it's just once a week, you should.
I should try.
Throw it out there, man. You should.
I'll try to, just for you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as long as, especially if it's just for me, that's the part. All right, here I'm gonna stop the recording.